Imagine a weapon that can paralyze a nation without a single bomb dropping. Overnight, supply chains freeze, foreign investment vanishes, and a country's entire economy grinds to a halt. If a country like South Africa or Nepal places economic sanctions on an adversary, the global market largely shrugs it off. Trade simply finds another route. But when the United States imposes sanctions, the target is instantly and completely isolated from the outside world. This happens because the global economy is not a decentralized open marketplace. It functions as a closed-loop system where the overwhelming majority of international trade is required to clear through American-controlled financial institutions. To understand how America gained the leverage to freeze out any nation on Earth, we have to reverse engineer the trap and see exactly how the rest of the world willingly walked right into it. By the end of World War II, major European powers and Japan were reduced to rubble. Their infrastructure was gone, and their industries were crippled. Across the Atlantic, however, the American mainland remained completely untouched. While Europe was fighting, America was busy manufacturing and selling them weapons, food, and supplies. Because those warring nations paid in physical gold, the U.S. ended up hoarding nearly 70% of the entire world's gold reserves. The world was practically broke. In 1944, delegates from 44 nations gathered at a hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, looking for a way to restart global trade. The United States stepped up with a proposal. Because almost no one had gold left, the U.S. suggested that nations should stop backing their local money with gold. Instead, they would back their money with the U.S. dollar. To convince them this was safe, the U.S. made a hard promise. They guaranteed that anyone holding $35 US could always exchange it for exactly 1 ounce of physical American gold. Desperate to rebuild, the global community agreed. They detached their autonomies from physical metal and plugged directly into American paper, confident it held the exact same value. That confidence lasted until 1971. The U.S. had been secretly printing far more currency than it actually had gold to cover. Facing a potential run on Fort Knox, President Richard Nixon abruptly canceled the convertibility of the dollar to gold. Panic set in worldwide. Nations were suddenly holding billions in paper reserves that were no longer anchored to a hard asset. The dollar's value was threatening to collapse. To prevent a crash, America leaned on a relationship cultivated decades earlier. American oil companies had been operating heavily in Saudi Arabia, and the Saudi royals needed physical security for their booming infrastructure. The U.S. offered the Saudis military protection and weapons. In return, the Saudis agreed to price and sell all of their oil exports exclusively in U.S. dollars. Soon, the rest of the oil-producing Arab nations followed suit. Because oil powers every modern economy, any country that wanted to keep its factories running and cars driving now had to maintain a massive stockpile of American currency to buy it. The dollar didn't need gold anymore. It was now backed by the absolute necessity of energy, turning American currency into a mandatory utility for human survival. Moving trillions of these petrodollars around the globe requires massive logistical infrastructure. That's where the SWIFT network comes in. It's the highly secure messaging system that international banks use to authorize cross-border transfers. Officially, SWIFT is a cooperative owned by thousands of member banks worldwide. Practically, it operates under the heavy, unspoken influence of the United States. If the U.S. decides to penalize a country, it can order the network to sever that nation's banks. Once disconnected, a country cannot clear international payments. They can't export goods, and they can't pay for imports. If the petrodollar is the blood supply keeping the global economy alive, SWIFT is the central engine pumping it, and the United States retains the ability to stop it on command. Because this financial monopoly grants so much geopolitical leverage, the U.S. views any attempt to bypass the dollar system as a direct challenge to the current world order. In the year 2000, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein stopped accepting dollars for oil, switching all transactions to the euro and accumulating over 26 billion euros in reserves. 3 years later, a U.S.-led coalition invaded Iraq, resulting in the complete dismantling of his regime. Years later, Muammar Gaddafi attempted to launch a unified gold-backed African currency to compete with the dollar. Leaked diplomatic emails from the U.S. State Department at the time highlighted this specific move as a threat to Western financial interests. His rule ended shortly after, following a NATO-supported intervention. While these conflicts involve complex regional politics, a pattern has emerged over the last 20 years. Major oil producers who attempt to decouple their energy exports from the US dollar frequently face sudden, kinetic military intervention. Fast forward to today. The US has increasingly relied on expansive secondary sanctions, punishing neutral countries for trading with targeted nations like Iran or Russia. Watching major powers get instantly cut off from Western markets has terrified the international community. This fear has sparked a movement known as de-dollarization. Realizing that the dollar can be weaponized against them at any moment, rival nations are actively trying to build financial lifeboats. The BRICS nations are making concrete moves. China recently completed its first major oil trades with Saudi Arabia in yuan. India is pushing for bilateral trade in local rupees. And the bloc is actively discussing the creation of an entirely new shared reserve currency. The US dollar trap remains an incredibly effective tool of statecraft. But by using it so aggressively to dictate global politics, the United States has finally given the rest of the world the motivation it needs to start building an exit door.